Welcome to Schweitzer Drive, a podcast where we explore what goes on between the generation of electricity and the light switch. Join Dave Whitehead as he interviews the entrepreneurs, innovators, and experts who are inventing the future of electric power.
Hi, I'm Dave Whitehead, CEO of Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories and the host of Schweitzer Drive. We've got a great podcast today. With the ambitious goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions at the federal and state levels, it seems like a good time to take a fresh look at the potential of nuclear power. My guest today is Bob Schuetz, and he's the CEO of Energy Northwest, where he oversees the operation of the Columbia Generation Station, the only commercial nuclear energy facility in the Northwest. The station is the third largest electricity generator in Washington state, behind Grand Coulee and Chief Joseph dams, and is part of a fleet of about 90 commercial nuclear reactors that produce about a fifth of the electric power in the U.S. last year. Today, we are going to talk about some of the current challenges and future opportunities of nuclear power. So a quick intro for Bob. Bob is a 28-year U.S. Navy veteran who retired from service as the Deputy Commander and Chief of Staff for the U.S. Pacific Fleet Submarine Force, where he oversaw more than 7,000 service members operating 36 ships from 4 bases. Hey, Bob, just as a side note, when I graduated, my dad was a submariner. When I graduated from college, I went and worked at Electric Boat on the East Coast, and I was in the combat systems area. So I was at the front end of the boat, not the back end of the boat. But it was a great job right out of school because submarines pop up in great places like Hawaii and San Diego and Bangor, Washington. So we got a little bit of commonality there. Before joining Energy Northwest in 2013, he served as a plant evaluation team leader for the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. He holds a bachelor's degree in nuclear engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I got my master's from RPI, a master's in engineering management from Old Dominion University, and a master's in economics from the University of Oklahoma, as well as a senior reactor operator management certificates from Energy Northwest and Westinghouse. Hi, Bob, and thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, good morning, Dave. Glad to be here.
This is going to be fun. I've been excited to hold this podcast. You and I were talking a little bit before we got on in this green push, if you will, to get to a more greener environment. I don't see how you do it without nuclear energy as part of your energy portfolio.
Yeah, certainly with the mix of technologies available today, if you want to do it at a reasonable cost, nuclear power would seem to be the only option. Other choices might be pump storage, but nobody wants a big reservoir in their backyard. And maybe someday we get there with batteries, but not today's technology.
Yeah, I think that I'm with you 100%. I think the best battery I've ever seen is Bank Lake, right? Where it's a big pump storage place, but it does take up a lot of surface area. So before we even get into that, our podcast listeners are really varied. Some are very technical, while others certainly are not. So I'd like to begin by asking you to explain, maybe at a high level, how nuclear power really is created.
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that a nuclear power station is really not significantly different than a coal-powered plant or oil-fired plant or even a trash burner if you happen to have one. At the end of the day, we all boil water to make steam, and everything else is exactly the same from one plant to the next. So what's unique about nuclear power is that we make that steam using nuclear energy, and the fuel is uranium. Uranium-235 to be exact. And essentially when a uranium atom absorbs a neutron, it splits apart and it emits some energy and some more neutrons from that. And that energy is used to boil the water. And those neutrons that come out go on to fission other uranium atoms. And that process goes on, and we have systems that control it. But essentially, it's just that simple. We make some heat and we boil water with it, and it goes on and turns a big turbine.
And one of the, I think, the advantage, it's always there. So typically a nuclear reactor runs months. In the case of Columbia, we're a boiling water reactor on a 2-year fuel cycle. So typically when we start up after a refueling outage, we'll run 23 straight months at nearly full power the whole time.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, before we come offline again for about 30 days to refuel.
I saw an article the other day in the newspaper, maybe it was more than the other day, about you guys took some time out to do some refueling or some maintenance on the plant. And that was right in that, maybe it was this year in June when it got really, really warm. And that's when everybody realized how valuable an asset your generating plant was.
Yep, that's a fact. We normally do our refueling outages in May, and that's driven by here in the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of spring melting and runoff from the snowpack. So there's typically a large volume of water behind the dams. And so it's a convenient time in the region to keep all our different energy sources balanced, that we let the dams run full out in the spring when they've got all the water. And so it has been for us a convenient time to do that refueling.
I think, as I recall, last June was a very unique one. It got into about 110 degrees here. Everybody wanted to turn on their air conditioners, right? And that was really uncharacteristic of a June here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, fortunately, we got back online just before that huge heat wave hit. So,
well, thank you, because I ran my air conditioners 24/7, I think, during that time. Can you talk us through some of the biggest advantages of nuclear and why you are an advocate of growing the U.S. and the Washington state's nuclear power footprint?
Well, let me just start, at the top is nuclear power is a clean source of energy. And by clean, I mean we don't emit any carbon whatsoever. And that's particularly important here in Washington state to support the governor's Clean Energy Transformation Act, which is really, the goal is to be completely carbon free in the electric sector by 2045. So we can be a big part of making that happen. The second thing is nuclear power is very reliable. If you look across the industry over the last decade, your typical nuclear power plant is online 95% of the time. 7 days, 24 hours a day, we're almost always there. The next would be, and it's kind of related to the reliability, is, we are firm base load power. And by that, I mean you can count on us 24 hours a day. If you're an electric utility and you're going to buy some renewable energy source, so solar or wind, those have capacity factors well under 50%, which means if you need 100 megawatts of power for your district and you buy it with solar, you've got to also buy 100 megawatts somewhere else to be able to provide that energy 24 hours a day. I think all of our ratepayers, they don't want to worry about what time of day it is. They want to come home, turn on the lights, turn on the TV, cook dinner, and not worry about where the power's coming from. So you need a mix of renewables and other firm baseload power. In this area, we're blessed. We're blessed with the federal hydropower system, which provides that same reliable baseload power. And finally, maybe to close that out, here in the U.S., very safe. If you were to compare OSHA injuries across all the different industries, you would find that nuclear power is really about as safe as it can be. And then finally, cost effective. The cost of running the average nuclear station is under $30 a megawatt hour. That number probably doesn't mean much to your listeners, but compared to most renewable sources, it's pretty competitive, especially if you consider that most of the renewables are receiving some type of tax credit or tax incentive to operate. Still, we're able to be pretty cost effective compared to those.
And just on the cost competitiveness, I think one thing we don't factor in when we think about the cost of the electricity, whether subsidies or not, is the availability of that electricity, right? That there should be some benefit, or I don't want to say a premium because that's usually going the wrong way, right? But some advantage to nuclear power because it's always there, as you pointed out, whereas wind is not, right? It doesn't always blow. We talked about the challenges Texas had in February with having a lot of wind as part of their energy mix. And there were some other challenges, with winterization of other plants and stuff like that. But, I just don't see us in the Northwest, certainly when we have nuclear power available, running into the same challenges that they had in Texas earlier this year.
Yeah, the interesting thing in this area is, we do have wind generation, a lot of it, especially up and down the Columbia Gorge. And, but, when do you need your electricity? You need it in the winter when it's really cold and the summer when it's really hot, which are exactly the times of year that the wind doesn't blow.
Yep.
Wind is big in the spring and the fall.
Yep.
And so, again, the reliability and the firm baseload aspect of nuclear power is certainly one of our biggest advantages.
Certainly, like you pointed out, we're blessed here in the Northwest with where we can have windy days, but we also have these big rivers, right, that are the best batteries in the world for storing up energy. So they can balance each other. You bring in nuclear, it just gives you that base load all the time. It's I can't think of a better way to be green. When it comes to energy production, it's brilliant. We are fortunate to be where we're at.
That's a fact.
During the intro, I mentioned that the current U.S. nuclear energy fleet is about 90 reactors. I know there have been a number of recent nuclear projects that have been abandoned or delayed. What is the current outlook and timeline for new reactors in the U.S., and what's going on with nuclear outside the U.S.? Yeah.
So inside the U.S., really, there's only one new construction project currently ongoing. That's the Vogtle 3 and 4 reactors in Georgia, which are running behind and over budget. I think they were projected to come online early next year, but I saw Georgia Power has announced that they're probably going to be delayed till at least 2023. And, part of the reason for that is the Vogtle reactors are very much like Columbia or the current fleet of existing reactors. They're huge. Columbia's 1,200 megawatts, and these new plants will be about the same. They're just very complex machines. So, going forward here in the U.S., you're going to see a shift away from these big, huge plants to small modular reactors or smaller reactors. So, U.S. Department of Energy recently put a program together that they call the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project, which is designed to bring these smaller module and advanced design reactors to market. Energy Northwest has actually partnered with two companies who won those grants, which are pretty substantial. Federal government will pick up 50% of the cost constructing the new ones. So again, we're powered with the two companies that won those grants. The first is Terrapower, which is owned by Bill Gates and based here in Washington. They're probably going to actually build their plant in Wyoming and sell the power to PacifiCorp. Smaller plant, about 80 megawatts as opposed to 1,200 megawatts, using a different technology. It's not a light water reactor like the current fleet. Similarly, X Energy, which is based in Maryland, we're partnered with them and Grant County to bring their technology, which is not new. It's called a pebble bed. I could really go into engineer land here and talk for days about it, but let's just say it still uses uranium, but the way it's constructed is a little different. But again, smaller unit, 80 megawatts. The concept is that you actually build the nuclear components somewhere else in a factory, and you just run them in on a train, and then stick them on a pad and hook them up to a turbine, which would be a commercial off-the-shelf turbine, and away it goes. So that's where the U.S. is headed for these smaller designs. Should be much cheaper. Should be able to run at a very good cost of power. Your second question was what's going on outside the U.S. And maybe with one exception, nuclear power is, pardon the term, exploding. There's a huge amount of construction in Russia and China, India. Almost everybody is building them because they recognize those positive attributes that I just mentioned: reliable baseload power, and it's clean, non-carbon emitting. The one outlier is Germany, which is a bit of a surprise, known for being, very much engineering and science focused. But following the problems in Fukushima, Germany made a decision to retire all of their nuclear reactors. And The bad news is, one, they're going to replace it with carbon emitting natural gas, which they're planning to buy from Russia of all places. So it's just odd, you can tell by my last name, I'm German. My grandparents were German, and I've always thought of the Germans as very engineering and scientific like. It just seems an odd place for them to be.
Yeah. Well, as with any energy resources, each one of them has their own unique challenges. However, nuclear, perhaps more than others, faces a few really big challenges. And yet, I'll argue the payoffs for solving these will be really, really big, not only for the companies that solve them, but for our country and other countries too. Will you talk us through some of these and how you're working to overcome both these at Energy Northwest and perhaps at the national level? And the first one, I think, is let's start with cost. And this is one of the biggest challenges. The cost to build a nuclear plant has skyrocketed. You mentioned the stuff that, or the plants that Southern companies putting in Georgia. A number of other big projects have been shut down due to the cost overruns as well as other challenges. What can be done to bring down the cost? And you mentioned microreactors or those modular reactors. How might those play a role in more broadly deploying nuclear power?
A big part of our cost here at Columbia are all the safety systems that are built into it. We need backups on electrical power and water pumps, and that's a big capital expense initially, and then it's ongoing operating expense to keep all that equipment running right. So these new design reactors have, I'll say, engineered safety in. So the X-energy design, I wouldn't say at the end of the day it's any safer than Columbia, but they achieve safety in a different way. So they've developed a fuel called triso that really can't melt. Bottom line. So they don't need all those safety systems. If something goes wrong at X-energy reactor, they just turn off the lights and shut the door and walk away. And the reactor will just sit there and be safe. It doesn't require any external power, doesn't require any external water, doesn't require any operator actions. So there's a huge cost savings there by designing in the safety as opposed to the current fleet of reactors, which rely on all kinds of systems and procedures and people to implement it. At the end of the day, it ends up with two, they're both very safe designs, but you get at it a different way. And then in terms of the upfront capital cost, if you just simplify the design, then to actually build it becomes much simpler too. Again, on these smaller reactors, the components are small enough that they could be built in a factory somewhere and then just come in on a rail car or a truck. You're not trying to piece it together on your property. It's like, I guess, building a house. You either stick build your new house, or you buy a prefab and it comes in. Which one, at the end of the day, is cheaper? You might not like the look of it, but it's less expensive and probably built faster.
Those small modular reactors, when you use the word small, maybe that's small is a relative term. My understanding is that the size of probably one of these small modular reactors is taking two school buses, putting them end to end, and that's about the size there. Is that about right? Or
yeah, that would be about right, at least for the X-energy design. There are many different designs, but GE has a new boiling water reactor that I wouldn't call, I think they might advertise it as a small modular reactor, but it's like 300 megawatts. So it's
that's
still
big.
Pretty large. Yeah, that is. But anyway, so I think the small ones, whether it be Terrapower, X-energy, or here in the Pacific Northwest, we also have NuScale that actually has a licensed design. All those modules end up in the 50 to 80 megawatt range. And then if you need 300 megawatts, that's okay, but you just build 4 of them.
Yeah.
And build them one at a time, and you build them as you need them. The electric load in the Pacific Northwest has been pretty flat for the last decade. We've been able to keep it that way, I think, through more energy efficiency and savings. But, looking ahead, once the Clean Energy Transformation Act is about electricity generating, but There's other polluting sources like cars and transportation. So if we electrify transportation and now everybody goes home at night and wants to plug their Tesla in to charge the battery, where's that power going to come from? Got to come from somewhere.
That's the question I've had. Certainly in Washington State, we've talked about reducing, things that burn natural gas, right? Eliminating those from your household. We were looking at the cost or the changing over our plants here in Washington State from gas for heating to all electric. And I think, our electric bill would almost double is what, and certainly in the wintertime and stuff like that. So that electricity, to your point, has got to come somewhere. So I go home. I'm not going to buy a Tesla. I'll probably buy one of those Ford Lightnings, right? Because we're here in we like our trucks here in the Northwest. But all of these, right? We'll have to get electricity from somewhere. And so, while it may be flat, we can certainly see that we're headed towards a more electrified state, probably a region out here. And this is, to your point, we have to come up with some fast solutions. I don't think wind will get us all the way there quick enough. I don't think solar's gonna do it. It's gonna have to come from we get back to that dispatchability too, right? It's like I'm gonna need to charge my truck to go to work every morning, so I can't wait till the sun shines.
Yeah. So on the front end, the capital cost of building the plant, I think these new designs end up being cheaper to begin with, and so then you got to look at the operating costs, and I think you would find that if you were to remove the production and operating subsidies that the renewables get, you would find that nuclear is probably cheaper and at worst case at the same cost. So, if you think you can spend less money to get solar, you're only doing that because you're paying for part of it out of your tax dollars as well. And so I know the industry and the current federal legislation between the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better, whatever version of that might eventually pass, do include maybe a little more fairness in the energy production and providing some subsidies to the big baseload generators as well.
So nuclear, what I really like is it's really clean and it's always there. But of course, there's two challenges I think everybody brings up is what do you do with the waste and the safety concerns if something were to happen. So let's start with waste. With Yucca Mountain site getting shut down, where do we stick this stuff? Eventually, it's got to go somewhere. I think right now you guys are just storing it on site, but eventually we have to have, certainly a national level plan for how to manage the waste at some point. What are your thoughts there?
Well, so in the near term, there's really no impediment to storing the waste on site. I about right before COVID hit, had someone out here from Seattle, and let's just say they were at best nuclear ambivalent, but was taking them on a tour of the station, and right up front they said, well, you can show me whatever you want, but until you deal with all this waste you guys generate, I really just can't be in favor of it. So I took this young lady out to where we store our spent nuclear fuel. And so Columbia started operation in 1984. So, we're 30 plus years old. And I showed her all of the nuclear waste from, 30 plus years of operation, which is on a concrete pad that's about the size of a Walmart. Okay.
Wow.
It is not a lot of volume. And that's stored in canisters that are pretty spread out. So, the big challenge on nuclear waste, in terms of the public accepting nuclear power as a safe, reliable, worthwhile energy source is really just a little bit of education. I think in their mind, if you were to stand next to a coal plant and look at 1 year of coal ash that's generated from it, which is like a huge mountain, right?
Yeah.
And then look at, our little Walmart size spent fuel storage area, their perception immediately changes. So at that level, there is just an education piece, but to maybe where your question started, Someday the U.S. will need some policy on how to deal with this waste. And there's a couple options. One is to store it somewhere. The other is that you can reuse the fuel. We do not extract all the energy that's in that uranium or the byproducts out of the fuel. The country, really since nuclear power started, has taken the policy position that we are not going to reprocess our fuel. And the reason they did that was a byproduct of the fission reaction. Uranium fission reaction is plutonium, which could be used for weapons, but you just can't hold it in your hand. So other countries reprocess, and so they take that fuel and reprocess it and use it in another reactor. But we don't do that. We could do that, and that would reduce the amount of waste generated.
I was going to ask you about that, the whole recycling, reprocessing the fuel. I understand France is really good at it, right? And my understanding it can be a little bit expensive, but it can really reduce your waste footprint, if you will, right? And the policy to reprocess or not reprocess has kind of been on and off again, depending on which administration is in office at the time. But I was just kind of wondering your thoughts. Are you a fan of reprocessing, or?
Well, there's not an infinite amount of anything. So eventually we will run out of uranium. And there are other choices. Thorium can also be done, but we're creating fuel in the fuel we have. The good news is it's stored in a way that should there be a future decision to reprocess, it's all still available.
That's great.
And so we could go after it. But those are, I'll say, political and policy decisions. They're not technical decisions.
That's always the interesting part, right? The technology we've got figured out, right? It's whether we have the will to do it or not.
Exactly.
Let's move on to the safety, right? That's always I think the big bugaboo, if you will, when it comes to nuclear. Certainly, we've all seen Fukushima, and if you're old like me, you probably remember Chernobyl or maybe even 3 Mile Island, where you talk about those particular incidents. And recently, I read in Seattle Times article that began with providing some insight into the refueling process and maybe some challenges of that, which I think is just really fascinating. Makes me, it shows the clear importance that you have to place on process and safety for everybody working around in this industry.
Yeah. So, if you get past the hysteria, and look at actual consequences, nobody was really harmed. So of the three big, I'll say nuclear concerns, which would be, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, and Chernobyl. Let's just put Chernobyl aside for a second. 3 Mile Island, nobody was harmed from that. Nobody died, no extra cancers. The big impact was that we had to retire that unit early. So lost capital investment, so increased costs to the ratepayers. Fukushima, the failure there was not the earthquake. In other words, the earthquake didn't come in and cause all that damage and shake it apart. It was the tsunami, the water. Nobody expected a 40-foot wall of water to come ashore and destroy the emergency electrical generators and ability to keep the core covered, and so it was not necessarily a failure of the technology. But again, even at Fukushima, nobody was really harmed. Now, I'll say the economy was harmed. Japan shut down all the reactors for a little while, and the cost of the cleanup and everything. So it's not without consequences. But again, I would say at Fukushima, if you look at their sister plant. So when we say Fukushima, we mean Fukushima Daiichi. A few miles south is another nuclear power station, Fukushima Daini, which also experienced the tsunami, but operated just fine.
Yeah.
So, why is that? Well, part of it is, how the plant was situated, the response of the operators. So at the end of the day, it can all be done safely. Chernobyl is an outlier. There were people harmed from the Chernobyl thing. But what I would tell you is it's a very different design reactor. It's a graphite moderated reactor that is inherently less stable than light water reactors. And they were running an experiment on it they had no business running. They violated all their safety procedures in the course of doing that. And it resulted in a disaster. So in the U.S., we are very much procedurally driven. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission comes in and watches us and monitors us and tests us and examines us to the proficiency, knowledge, and skills of our operators and their ability to safely operate the plant. So again, I feel very safe working here. My previous role in the company, my desk was only about 60 feet away from the reactor, and I didn't get any unusual radiation exposure from it. It never really bugged me. To be quite honest, I never really thought about it until one day someone said, "Well, how far away from the reactor you are?" And I said, "Well, yeah, it's only about 60 feet." And
I got to believe in your first career, you slept next to one too for a handful of years, right?
If you were sleeping in the engine room, they got annoyed at you.
Oh, so we've talked a little bit about the past. I'd like to talk a little bit about the future. So what gets you excited about nuclear energy? And is there a new process or technology on the horizon that you think are going to go a long way to really dial up nuclear energy? We talked about small modular reactors and maybe even those micro reactors, those pellet ones, and what have you.
Well, so there, I am excited about it. I'm hoping in my tenure here at Energy Northwest to see that we actually bring a small modular reactor online. I mentioned earlier about X Energy and Terrapower. The grants they have from DOE really ask them to get that new reactor connected to the grid in 7 years, which is and it can happen. It'll be amazing if it does, because those designs aren't even licensed yet. But the NRC is supporting bringing these new ones to market. But what'll be different about them than Columbia? First of all, they're physically much smaller. Two, they require a lot fewer people to operate. And then three, again, they're inherently, at least the X Energy design is inherently safe. It's walk-away safe. That means you need fewer people to operate it, and which runs the cost of running it down. So it makes it really cheap. Inexpensive. So I think you will see, if we as a country can get one of those built, so NuScale is partnered with somebody in Utah to bring it up, X Energy with us, TerraPower at the Wyoming site. If in the next 5 or 6 years or so, we can bring one of those to market and people can see that it's possible, that it can be done safely, it can be done inexpensively, and it is going to help the environment, then I think the market explodes. Everybody's nervous about buying serial number 1 of anything. But serial number 2, maybe not. The X Energy design is, again, I think they show that they can build the current plan here in the Pacific Northwest is to build 4 80-megawatt modules. And I think they get built in like 4-month chunks of time. You go to Vogtle and it's been 10 years of construction and it's still not done.
Yeah.
So that's what's exciting to me. What's exciting is all the challenges in nuclear power. I think we have find a way to do it economically, responsibly, and the time is right. Everybody now is focused on the environment, as they should be. What are we going to leave for our kids and grandkids? I think here in Washington, the governor is pushing us to actually have the electric sector completely carbon free. If that can't be done in the Pacific Northwest, marrying nuclear power with all the hydro we have and supplemented by renewables, if it can't happen here, it probably can't happen at all. So what's exciting to me is let's show them it can be done. And I think we're well positioned to make that happen.
I agree with you 100%. If it can't be done here, it probably can't be done anywhere else in the country. We are so, as we pointed out, blessed. Bob, I was pro-nuclear before I had this conversation with you this afternoon. I am even more pro-nuclear right now. I'm excited about all the opportunities here, and if we can get these smaller reactors that we can drop in, that will be a game changer for our energy infrastructure here in the U.S. That is really exciting,
and a game changer for the environment.
Oh, I agree. Well, Bob, thanks very much for all your time talking about nuclear, and hopefully we'll have you back after you get some more reactors installed in your backyard.
You bet. I'd like to come out and see your place one day. So
well, there's always an invitation. We'd love to host you. Thanks again.
Take care.
Thank you for stopping by Schweitzer Drive. Join us again as we learn about, explore, and celebrate electric power. For more information about the show, please visit selinc.com/Schweitzer Drive.